I think working group compensation is going to be a really great topic because we're hot on it from our grants discussion, and
For
it's
sure.
also the missing element of our current um, framework document here. Like our framework document is mostly complete, except for the working group model. Um, is mostly a draft of ideas, and it still needs to really come together. So I think talking about how we want to do compensation is going to really carve that out more um, clearly. So that'll probably occupy most of our meeting today, I would imagine.
Let's start with that. Yeah,
Okay.
great. Let's start with that. For
Okay.
sure.
Are there any other urgent topics that people feel like we need to discuss today, just to be able to make time for everything? Or are we happy to spend as much time as we need on that topic?
I think this topic's the most important thing to push the overall narrative along.
Okay,
For
cool.
sure.
I agree.
Nice. So, one idea that I have is there's this concept of the working groups and coordinators, and there's this fear that um, identifying specific people to be quote unquote champions or working group leaders or coordinators might endanger people's interest in being involved because they feel like sort of the recognition, like all the credits going to like a couple people anyway, and you can kind of just depend on them, so you don't really need to show up anymore. But we do still need like a robust group of contributors, not just the people identified as coordinators. So maintaining like this culture of understanding that coordinators are not meant to be like the only contributors, but they're meant to be people who help coordinate between contributors. So in that way, I think we could do two different forms of compensation. We can do coordinate for all contributors, so we can have this sort of egalitarian distributed equity for contributors of different weights depending on people's recognition of their contributions. But then we can also have coordinators who just have like a specific set compensation and expectation of workload. And that way, like those coordinators can be expected to be present at all meetings. They can keep notes going. They can keep recordings going. They can keep the documentation relevant, accurate, like on schedule. They can keep the ball rolling and adhere to all of the different timelines that the different working groups have. Make sure that coordination is functioning properly. So there's like a base workload for that, and they can just receive a base set compensation. And then we can also allocate a certain amount to coordinate for that can be distributed amongst all contributors. So the idea is that like if you are a coordinator, you are also a contributor, just like everyone else. And your role as coordinator is not to like influence the documentation with your own opinions. That would be your role as a contributor, which is equal to everyone else. But holding this role as a coordinator is like this agnostic and balanced sort of role outside of your realm as a contributor. Um, that's the idea. I kind of tried to lay that out in the document, but I didn't touch on compensation. So, what do you guys think?
So I really like that idea. I think one of the reasons, so you brought up that like people are afraid that like, if there's like a coordinator or a champion or leader, whatever it is, that like, people are less likely or less inclined to participate, right? Because it comes from, the corporate mindset, right? Like, the idea of like people like the ground floor workers doing all the work, and then like, this untalented leader of the team, whatever it is, getting all the credit, right? So I think that fear is definitely well grounded. But I think, as you mentioned, Michael, about like establishing a culture that like everybody contributes and stuff like that, right? Keeping it like, there's a coordinator, but keeping like the kind of like quote unquote hierarchy. I don't like using that word, but like as flat as possible. That like that we can establish that kind of culture. that it's like, just because they're a coordinator doesn't mean like they're going to take all the credit. They're a contributor as well, right? They're just there to like, be, because like my job at full stack product manager, I am cross functional. That's what a like coordinator is supposed to be, like kind of like a cross functional person. So like, I lead the way that, I contribute to everything. Like, I'm not just like dictate here and then like, not do any work. No, I'm in the weeds with everyone, and that's how I do things. And I think if we establish a culture like that, I think more people would be less afraid about the like, contributing.
Yeah, I mean, so like a few things, right? I mean, I think we've done a pretty good job here of, I mean, building that culture already, right? I mean, we don't have 20 people on these governance calls like we had, 3 weeks after mid, but we still have a core, group of, 6 to 8 people who tend to show up and put in the work of governance, which is great. That number has been a little lower lately. I'm in general agreement, subject to sort of, the amount of money available in the treasury, right? I also think to limit that, I mean, like, core members like me and CB and Sinjin, wouldn't necessarily take compensation, because I would be hopeful to be, a champion in governance. I don't want to do that in grants or treasury, but I like governance, as you guys know. So, uh, but in exchange for that role, because I'm on the core team and there's other ways to be compensated, I wouldn't take money from that and would just either spread that among the other leaders of that working group, or I would just add it in the coordinate, or keep it in the treasury, right? I mean, however we wanted to decide to do it, but I think otherwise, like the model's good, right? I'm like sort of, and maybe I'm still like too naive, but I don't know. Do people really worry that much about getting credit for stuff? Like I know that maybe in their hearts they do, um, but I don't know. Like,
And
does anybody here really worry a lot about making sure they're getting credit for the work, the final work product? I mean, maybe, right? Because that's human nature. But I'm just curious.
I mean, yeah, so, this is just from experience from like obviously the corporate world, but like, the thing is we're all coming from that, right? Regardless, like most of us are coming from that. And I think, there are a lot of concerns like, that have been, when I was promoted, there was a lot of concerns brought up to me that like, people don't recognize the work that they do. And I try to amplify that they do the work and stuff like that. But like there have been very little like, like there are not that many people that do something like that. So I think fear is well grounded. I know we've established a culture here, but like for potentially to people to like to assuage those fears, but that's still always going to pop up. It's hard to go away from something like that. And to your point here, also like for me at least, right? Like you know. I don't think I need to be compensated either, right? Like, myself. I mean, I definitely have my participation was a little bit lower the past couple of weeks because of like surgery, but like otherwise, I don't feel like I need to be compensated. Also, I want to be here, and I'm one of those people that like will work for like free, quote unquote. But I don't. I see this more as a vision thing than for me personally than a compensation thing. So I'm willing to also if I was in the conversation for payment, I would like no, just distribute that to other people.
Yeah, I think that's noble. I think it's slippery slope though when we don't at least have processes in place to where we say, look, this is yours to take if you want it. And if people decide to defer it for whatever reason, that's totally up to them. But I think we should always be thinking like, okay, how do we set it up to where when you change your mind one day, if this does turn into something much bigger than maybe we're all thinking about, that we didn't just back ourselves into some like awkward corner, you know?
Yeah.
And one thing, when I think about giving credit or, receiving credit for work versus compensation debate, something that comes to mind is, uh, you can give me all the credit you want, but I also can't pay my bills with credit, like, uh, it's sort of, I think you captured it, either Crypto Bushi or Stubbs yesterday on the grants call, and he really laid it out. Like, we don't want to be another organization that essentially, of course, there are always going to be the noble people. There's people that are working for the vision, people that, you know, have a lot of different projects open or whatever the case. But, um, to be if we want to lead this drive of, transitioning from it is our mission from corporate work to DAO work. I don't see why we shouldn't also start with our own, compensation plan and experiment with it and just live the mission in a sense.
Hey, this is Craig from We Love Colors. I This is an interesting point that I was actually thinking about raising in the Discord channels. Is one of the kind of limitations that I see with DAOs is that in order to like benefit from like coordinate or other ways of compensation, there has to be a high level of visibility of what you're doing, and so kind of like rewards people that are like very vocal, very visible what they're doing. Whereas there might be members in DAOs that are making significant contributions that are just going under the radar. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think that it would be good if there was some way to figure out how to reward that. Because another thing about DAOs that happens is the decentralized nature, and the time zone thing. It's like it seems like in order to get that visibility, you have to be very much on these meetings, and not everyone can necessarily do that. And to facilitate pushing things forward with DAOs, I think the asynchronous work and people doing stuff that aren't necessarily in the meetings, if we could get more of that and more of that pushing forward, because I participate in meetings, and I think like the time could be used more productively to actually pushing forward something sometimes, and then also the time to get into the meetings you can't necessarily always.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to echo that sentiment. The coordinate model can sort of
I think I thought of in the
cultivate
past too, with like
it's like
with
a
just DAO in
popularity
general. Like
contest.
we're very much in like a kind of entrepreneur forward space right this second. Okay, I think he's getting rugged, or I am.
Yeah, I think
Can you hear
that
me? Okay,
I
I'll
think
go. So I was
go
just
ahead.
gonna say that I think we're in a situation where like if you are gonna be working for DAOs full time, in my eyes, you're really just an entrepreneur. I mean, you're like a 1099 subcontractor basically, and so you work for yourself, and that you have to have that mindset to like to succeed at least in the short term, in my opinion, until DAOs like really figure out some of the issues we're talking about, and I don't really know what those solutions are. But I kind of feel like all the people here, like I recognize all of you guys have contributed in some way or another because you've shown up and you've done stuff. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if we will be able to solve that problem in the short term, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Like it,
it's probably too big to attack. I just do think like that if it
yeah,
contribute,
well, that's what I'm
use
saying.
for
I don't think
shadow
we really
shadowy
have fostered
prototypes.
an environment for those people to really contribute in a meaningful way at this point yet. Because if they are, let's say they are theoretically a shadowy supercoder, and they don't contribute through thoughts or ideas or anything, but they contribute through providing a product, it'll become very apparent that that product that person has made has contributed a lot of value at some point. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know. Eventually, somebody has to prove themselves some way or another. Either it's through providing a product, a service, or value in some other way. Like the person has to take that step, or else I just don't see how they would make it in this space at all, at least in the short term.
Yeah, I think that there is a danger of the coordinate like equity distribution model sort of just fostering like a popularity contest, and that can help in some ways and make things interesting, but also to We Love Colors point, like I think there is a lot of really high value work that might get lost between the cracks and not get noticed. And I think that maybe that can be one of the roles of coordinators, is to recognize, because the coordinators, they're going to see everything that's going on. They're going to be up to date with things. So they're going to know like who's putting in the work in the end, where like a lot of people who participate in the coordinate rounds aren't going to actually have been present to see who did the work to be able to functionally distribute resources equitably, but the coordinators will be able to know really like who put in effort, even if it wasn't right in front of everyone's face, like super visible. Maybe like the coordinate distribution can be like everyone has some allocation, but the coordinators have like extra allocation because they're tasked with like um, putting effort into taking note of who is contributing, and then resources can be distributed equitably.
Well, so like, I mean, the way we do it in some guilds over at Bankless is to like not allow coordinators to, or like really role holders to receive, coordinate funds, but they can still allocate. Um, that might be some of the solution depending on the kind of pay levels that we're talking about giving coordinators.
Yeah, like they wouldn't receive allocation. They wouldn't receive funds through coordinate, but they would hold like coordinate allocation power because they
Yeah.
are on the forefront of noticing who has been contributing. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, right. No, they'd get give tokens to give, but they wouldn't be able to receive give tokens. That way you don't have people in the working group just give all their give to the coordinators and as you guys talked about the dangers of.
Exactly. Yeah, that sounds
I mean,
cool.
an alternative to this would be potentially that you elect champions that champion it through and they get compensated, and then the kind of other contributors don't get compensated directly, but at the end of like cohort 0 or at the end of each cohort you run a new election, and maybe you have it to where certain people can only stay on for a certain amount of time, but then these existing coordinators or champions could then like nominate others that they feel went above and beyond in like the previous cohorts, and maybe give them more like social signal towards them getting elected. That could be another alternative to where, because I still feel like there is value in people showing up without their hand out first and proving that they are like passionate, and that's exactly kind of how we founded this project in the first place. Like, Hiro Kennelly came out of nowhere, and he just started just providing so much value that eventually I was like, hey, do you want to join on a little bit more formally? And he's like, sure. And same with we've got Carl Sheriff, who's helping us with all the logistics of the shipping and shirts. Like, he just came out of nowhere and said, yeah, I'd love to take this on. He didn't come with his hand out, and he's ended up being like just an awesome resource. And so I feel like that is still a good thing to have. It's just kind of like a fine line of like, well, when does it become a situation of them proving themselves versus us taking advantage of them, right?
Yeah, that's the hardest part, is drawing that line and transitioning from one to the other.
Yeah.
One thing
Go ahead.
just to go back to one last thing you guys mentioned before I forget, um, was the idea that we don't really have a structure in place to kind of, incentivize or reward, like, the shadowy behind the scenes guys that, don't love the spotlight. But do they do something similar in Bankless, or even in other DAOs, for example, where and I see this tying into the coordinator role, where if they're setting the agenda and they're setting, tasks for each week or something like that, available and open tasks, maybe with like a bounty attached, and just say, you can claim this and submit this, and if it's satisfactory work, then you get the bounty or something.
Yeah, the bounty.
Bulletin board.
Yeah, I like the bounty idea. My only pushback on like coordinate and stuff like that is like it's so clunky and weird, and it's like you have to like go sign up for it, and if you miss it, I've missed coordinates before, and like so I didn't get to participate because I like missed it, and it just like there's so much going on in this space that I really think that the DAOs that are going to succeed in the future are going to be ones that just way simplify stuff. Because there's so many different protocols and different stuff going on, and it's just confusing as hell. Like, half the time I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and I miss stuff.
I would
Deadlines everywhere. Yeah.
I'm actually like of the mind that like I don't know. After participating in 300 coordinate rounds and honestly being like a real beneficiary of some of that largesse, I think coordinate sucks. If I'm being
Yeah.
totally honest. And I actually dropped a note in the CC call today because we're talking about doing another fucking coordinate in a week. I'm going like, how about we stop so many coordinates, man? Like, no, and so coordinate fatigue is real, and it is a tool for social signaling. It's a tool for social capital building. I think it works pretty well for that. I don't think it works very well to actually recognize pure contribution the way we think it does, and so I would be like super in favor of actually not using coordinate for a number of reasons, and approaching or examining other models for team compensation. I would honestly like be pretty okay with like there's a team allocation model, for example, where like outside of coordinate, working group members or team members just kind of decide who gets what, and you can use a weighted formula to figure out how that all averages out or means out. It doesn't require you to sort of like sign up at the right time to allocate, give, to write nice notes. Within some kind of time frame. So I think exploring other tools would be super useful, to be honest. And I don't know. And it's
Yeah, I
also
like
like,
that.
what is the point of the working group, right? I mean, it's to get the work done. And it does seem, slightly unjust from a justice perspective, if you want to use it, for someone who did not do as much work on a working group to get the same allocation as someone who did a lot of work who wasn't a coordinator. So I mean, you got to kind of figure that out a bit. But I don't know. I mean, I almost wonder like if you centralize that a bit and just allow the coordinators to determine that. Um,
Yeah,
they
or maybe you don't compensate them at all in the first cohort, like
right.
the working group. Maybe you just compensate the champions. And I mean, if we go back to the original vision of kind of all of this, the big picture here, if this is successful, like if Dowpunks is successful and we are successfully giving away grants, lots of DAOs and DAO leaders and DAO talent scouts are going to want to be in the seats, in the stands, watching what's happening, because they're going to want to try to pick out talent if this is a truly a place where talent is at, right? And so, in my opinion, what happens at that situation where if you have a bunch of talent scouts hanging out in our Discord and some of like the DAO leaders all hanging out here, then that means that we're going to have also potential people showing up that want to work in DAOs, wanting to contribute here to kind of prove themselves. And it almost becomes like a proving ground sort of area. And so I can see a situation where we do have a lot of engaged people working potentially for free because they realize in their minds that what they're doing isn't really free. What they're doing is they're proving themselves, and they might get picked out of the crowd for kind of going above and beyond and go to that next step, regardless if they get a Dow Punk grant or not, right? I mean, look, it's already happened to Hero Kennelly.
Sure.
We've already had a couple of DAOs come in here and try to poach Hero Kennelly out of us because they see what he's doing. And I think the same thing can happen to where people aren't going to feel like they're not getting compensated for their time. They're going to feel like they're investing in their potential to work in the space, and so maybe we don't have to directly compensate people. Maybe the compensation really is the fact that they can participate and potentially get an opportunity thrown their way.
I mean, that's always been my sentiment, right? But also, like, I'm on the weird end where it's been, that's been true for me, and I know that's not true for everybody, and so fine. I don't know. Like, this is tough, right? Like, I think that maybe even a better way to do it is, I mean, I'm mindful of what you're saying, CB, for sure. I mean, what if coordinators well, I mean, like, think about how we use bank, right? We don't use bank here very often, but bank is used as a way to show recognition for work above and beyond what is required of your role or of your task or of your bounty or of whatever. I mean, you could set a social kind of cultural standard of having coordinators, tip out a portion of whatever they receive for the income they do for that work, to contributors as they see fit. Um, I mean, that would be, and then you kind of bake that into the framework as being a normative value that we use going forward. What do you think, Micah?
Yeah, I actually like have my own conceptual model of like what makes a DAO so powerful, and part of that model, which we are sort of creatively not utilizing, is the token, right? Like our project is unique in that we don't have a governance token, or that our governance token is an NFT. And it's interesting because there's only 1,111 of them, so it's like a low fidelity um, unit of information for like resource allocation or governance allocation. But with the governance token, a DAO has the ability to obviously mint your own local currency, and it doesn't necessarily need to have like free market value to be something that is an internal incentive for cooperation. So like as you're saying, like it can be used for social signaling and reward as a reward system, even if it doesn't have much value. And if it gains value over time because the greater community and free market sees that our project has lots of potential, then that's awesome. And then we have a huge treasury to fund our mission, and then craft the incentive structure. So for me, like the power of a DAO to mint its own token and use the token as the incentive for its incentive structure and craft an incentive structure that it can use to achieve its mission. That's like um, the regenerative sort of loop of monetary energy that a DAO has the power to cultivate. And so long term, I like the idea of having a governance token and using that to either think of it as compensation or just social signaling value. Um, I think it'd be fun to play with, but that's a more long
Yeah,
term thing.
an alternative could be too is that we could go to other DAOs and ask them for a sponsorship in their token, and then that way it basically, I could see lots of arguments for why they would want to do that. Like it's advertising for them. It creates an environment where people need to learn more about that specific DAO or protocol, and then basically we're getting funded with other DAOs tokens, and now we're tipping out tokens that do hold value, but they're not our tokens, and we're kind of cross DAO pollinating, kind of like what our initial goal is in the first place, and then we're avoiding kind of all the potential legal fallback of creating our own token potentially.
The token question is interesting, and like I think one issue that we are seeing in DAOs big time is when you have governance tokens and also being the economic token, right? And having those two align seems to create a lot of sort of long-term issues. I mean, I'm all for awarding governance tokens for not coordinate, but for incentivizing participation. But I would be really careful about wanting to give that governance token economic value. And then it's a question of is that incentive enough?
Yeah, but
I think long term you really want to separate economic value from voting power. I mean, big time. Um,
I was just going to say, we're back to square one though. Then it's useless. It's like there's
I
no
understand.
value. So it's like
Oh, totally.
you're paying me in like cool marbles. It's like,
No,
oh,
that's
cool. I
right.
got some.
No, I mean, I agree with you, and I'm saying though that I think you can do this in a way that still separates governance from incentives, right? And I would just be careful to incentivize the governance token with an economic might,
Right.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
cool.
And
coordinate.
We're unique in having found a solution to that by having the NFTs be the governance token, while the native token is economic and not governance. Like we've separated the economic and governance functions by creating NFTs and governance token.
Yeah, that's how I kind of an NFT and an incentive token, right? Because the NFT is the governance token, right? Essentially, the 21 token, and then the what you would reward contributors with would be a token of actual economic value apart from that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. I mean, you still have the NFT, the voting token itself still has value determined by the marketplace, right? But it's not as directly tied, and so um, yeah, I think at some point, guys, I mean, I think that Mike was right. Like at some point, you end up, needing some kind of token for a few reasons, and it could be that you have a model where, like, I don't know, I
I mean,
mean, if they have value, then because part of the background of this, right, is how do you allow people who participate in the community without punks, especially if punks appreciate value over time, like we expect them to participate in governance without actually having a punk, and what's the route by which they go to earn that voting power, and maybe you could figure out a way to exchange incentivized tokens for like a punk or a governance token. But we're kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, I realize.
yeah.
Yeah, Michael.
Well, it's interesting because, we can't give, let's say we mint a governance token, or not a governance token, it would be an incentive token. Like we can't give that token value. The free market gives that token value through demand. And most of the time, the demand for DAO governance tokens is its governance properties, you know. So if our incentive token that we mint doesn't have governance power, the demand for it to have any economic value would have to come from somewhere else. I actually dropped this idea in the workboard channel about basically using the grant applications as a source of data for the workboard so that we'd have like this robust index of talent that we can utilize. Basically, we can publish that like anonymously, and then we can offer contact to those people as a service to bigger projects who may be required to actually pay for that service using our native token, like punks, like punk token. So they'd have to pay for the service with punk token, which creates like free market demand for the token that actually gives, you know, economic value to the token. But yeah, going super way out into the weeds here. I don't know if we want to call it back in or if we're happy in the
Yeah,
weeds.
I was gonna try to call it back in, Mike Go Yang, but these are like super important discussions, right? And I'm actually really happy they're recorded because I think they'll be valuable later as we try to figure out what we're doing, you know, over a more medium term horizon. Okay, so to call it back in for a sec, working groups, compensation models, champions. Uh, let's go back to where we started like 20 minutes ago before we went on this beautiful kind of side tangent with CB saying, you know, I said, hey, you know, as a core team member who is compensated otherwise through that process, albeit, you know, minimally so far, um, what, you know, hey, I'm good not taking compensation if elected to, you know, a leadership position in governance, right? And then CB, I think you were saying like, well, hold on, like don't back yourself into a corner because later on maybe that comes back to bite us in the ass, you in the ass, or other people who serve in that role who maybe are on a core team as you expand, or something like that. So I think that's where we kind of left that discussion. So I'm curious what we think about that. Do we just like not worry about the fact that potential core team members or core team members who are leaders or on, you know, champions of different working groups have an alternate compensation method? Is it that they're doing enough work anyway where it doesn't matter, or, you know, should that be taken into account? Opinions.
I think we need to define that or clarify that core team sort of the roles and responsibilities of the core team and their compensation methods, you know, just to like lay that out in absolute clarity. And then that might solve the question itself because within that roles and responsibilities might include your involvement in governance and such is compensated via your role as like a member of the core team. And if we can kind of lay out like what is the core team, what does that mean, and like how have you guys gotten compensated? Like, you know, you say that, but I don't actually have any idea what you're talking about. You know what I mean? And it's kind of nice to know like how people actually are getting compensated and you know, what's going on with everything. So I would love to have that laid out in like the governance framework, but I don't know if it's clear enough or what your feelings are about that.
Yeah, I mean, to, you know, or go ahead, CB.
Oh, I was just gonna, I guess, break it down. I mean, basically, when we initially started this project, it was just Sinjin and I, and then you know a bunch of people over at Bankless DAO that helped kind of carry different balls across the finish line. And we had like an initial structure on what we were gonna do with the funds from the initial mint. And so I think we posted those somewhere and we can find them. But basically, like a percentage went back to Bankless DAO for basically, you know, funding and getting the project going for us. And then portions of it went to like the developers and the designers and all the people that actually helped like design assets. And then obviously there was a portion that went to Sinjin and I for like the actual creation of the artwork and again carrying it across the finish line. And then 25% got allocated over to the DAO Punk Treasury for the grant, which was 19 ETH. Other than that, really what's been kind of compensated as well was we had an initial agreement to take a portion of the secondary sales as well to the core team. It's been very little because there hasn't been much sales volume, so that's been a very kind of small amount. And then really we're trying to figure out, how to compensate ourselves in the future. Because again, I don't want to back myself into a corner personally either, like with the creation of artwork, because it takes a lot. And so, for instance, like we just did this piece with City DAO. They agreed to pay 3 ETH, and we were thinking in between the core team, like, well, how do we go about paying ourselves for this? Because obviously, I had personal expenses, and so did Sinjin for the actual creation of the artwork, and there's time and effort and all that good stuff. And so we're thinking, oh well, we want to send a good social signal back to the community that obviously, we're supporting the community, but we also want to get compensated as well. Like, none of us here want to work for free, and I don't ever want to get into a position where people expect that, like, if I create something that is DAO Punk related, that all the funds go into the DAO Punks, because then it's like, well, where's the incentive for me to continue creating, right? And so for this initial one, we kind of just picked an arbitrary number. We just said, look, let's just give the treasury 75%, and we'll take 25% into like our kind of operating account multi-sig. And so that's exactly what we did. The 25% that we took, though, doesn't really go into our pockets per se. It's really just kind of an operating account, because to run all the DAO Punk stuff does have monthly expenses. I mean, for instance, we have to pay for hosting of all the assets, all the NFT assets. We have to pay for API access for like the shirt claim. We have expenses on that side. So we really do have like operating expenses that we're not really like touching out of the DAO Punk treasury for the grants, because we want to just keep that for the grants. And then we have other people working for us too. So like, for instance, Carl Sheriff. Carl Sheriff has been like absolutely instrumental in the logistical side of the shirt claim. Like, imagine shipping a one-of-one shirt to every single country in the world. There's all sorts of weird things that go wrong, and they have. And so Carl has been really picking up the slack there and helping us. And so, we just paid Carl a little bit of money out of that ETH that we retained. So again, we're kind of like, we're taking some of the funds that we've gotten so far, and we're pretty much reinvesting it back into the community, kind of the way that we see fit in our and I know, with some DAOs there's like voting processes for some of this stuff, but I think in the early days it really does take kind of like a little bit of trust on one side to kind of continue to push the ball forward, and not add too many layers of bureaucracy, because then we're just going to kind of cripple ourselves into like no movement at all. And so really, when we talk about the core team, we're talking about me, Sinjin, and Hiro Kennelly as of right now. I am working full time in this space right now, and so this project is pretty much my full time focus, along with just the creation of art. And so I need to always kind of be cognizant of the fact myself that, like, okay, well, I want to continue to fund grants, and I want DAO Punks to make it, but I also have to survive too. And if I don't survive, then I can't see how the rest of the community can survive. And so that's kind of just been my mind. It's like just kind of walking through the dark and trying to do the right thing for everybody. And so that's really the breakdown of the core team. I don't know, Hiro or Sinjin, if there's anything else I kind of missed there, but that's kind of the 10,000 foot overview.
Yeah, I mean, the community survives without UCB, but I mean, you're not getting DAO Punks created, right? I mean, because the community could fork at any time, as we see happen sometimes, right? But I mean, you have a lot of synergy, and you guys provide a lot of tangible and intangible benefits, and I think that's kind of what you mean. There's other stuff too, right? Like, I mean, we set up some legal entities. Dow Punk Syndicate's a nonprofit incorporated in Delaware that we're working on, um, sort of wrapping the Dow Punks program under for legal liability shields and for tax purposes. That's an expensive endeavor. I'm a ton of dough out of pocket so far on that. And as we, employ lawyers to go through that shit more, so there's like normal expenses like that, right? That we're just sort of covering, and then kind of like at some point need to be kind of repaid for. Honestly, there's an LLC set up for a merch arm as well, and so there's work to be done on. There's expenses associated with all of that. We have a bookkeeper who's going to keep track of all of this stuff. There's an expense there, and so there's just like, I mean, you know, DAOs have administrative burdens, right? And so the core team deals with that in addition to dealing with, in this case for Syndion and for CB, the artistic creation process. I obviously don't have much to do with that in any real way. I don't create 3D visuals. I don't create dope merch like Syndion does. My skills are obviously very different, but that is, I mean, that is in essence it, Maiko. And so if the question is like, what does that mean? Well, I guess we have to define it, and I think it makes sense to define the core team in the governance document, and then the question becomes like, do you, set a payment amount split between, the grants and these different entities, going forward in a way that's in paper. And I think that there's some hesitancy there that CB highlighted to do that, for certain reasons. Now, I'm not saying you don't do it. I'm just saying you kind of got to weigh it, right? And if you do it on paper, how easy is it to change given economic circumstances? How does that play into the overall goals of the DAO? What are we trying to do here, et cetera, et cetera? So, like right now, nobody on the court. I mean, I haven't taken a penny yet, right? So we can talk about core team compensation, but so far there's none. Like literally, there is, of that 3/4 ETH, quarter of that went to Carl Sheriff, so that leaves, whatever that percentage is a quarter of 3/4 is something, like 60%. When you sit around, that would be my expenses tomorrow if we applied it to expenses, and then you're back to zero again. And so um, that's just kind of where we're at, right? And so there's another 3 ETH coming in at some point from the Aragon project. There's no other one-to-one collabs, kind of on the horizon. Although I definitely expect to do more. Um, so I'm curious what you guys think about what we're talking about here and how that fits in with the overall ethos of DAPunks, of contributor compensation and things of that nature.
Yeah, I totally identify with this process. Like I see you guys doing, I mean, you guys are conducting some serious business over here, and you're just like, you're paying expenses out of pocket. You're coordinating with all of these projects, doing these really cool deals on the side, like making things happen and bringing money into the treasury. And I think it's beautiful that you're putting that extra effort into signaling like your intention here, and that's like, um, it's resonating. So that's cool. And I see this like this is like the interim DAO process, right? Is like y'all as the founding team are like you're chewing glass and staring into the abyss, and that's like super hard work, and like you're just gonna do what you got to do to make things happen until we figure things out and like distribute this organization like thoroughly. For now, it seems like our treasury, when we talk about the treasury, we're talking about the grants treasury. So this whole work that we've put into the treasury management proposal is like the grants portion of our treasury, and then you guys as the core team are still managing our operational treasury. Like that's what I'm hearing. Mm.
Yeah, not quite. And so there is. I mean, just for total transparency, it's all good. So there's a separate multi-sig that was set up for that one-to-one collab, and that's all that's ever gone in there. And then um, there is an addition, and I'm only kind of understanding this now. We have a spreadsheet from Chorus, but I mean so you have the 19 set aside for grants, and then there's essentially at one point there was an equal amount of ETH set aside. A bunch of that ETH has gone to pay devs and different things associated with the mint. Some of that ETH has also gone to pay, for the T-shirts and things like that to printers. It's about $25 for DAOpunks to print a T-shirt, and so there's that per T-shirt cost. That's sort of that other chunk of ETH is sitting there as a cushion for that. And I think depending on the price of ETH, right now there may be none, and hopefully not in the negative there. But at one point before ETH crashed, I mean, it seemed like another 5 or so ETH sitting, um, they're able to be tapped for operational purposes. I'm not sure with ETH, crashing, like where those numbers actually come out with with having enough money in reserves to make sure that we can pay for T-shirts. And so it's an interesting question. I just don't know. And so I actually think when we're talking about the treasury and multi-sig, the main one, right? The grants multi-sig also has the 19 ETH plus, the other ETH that we're using to pay for T-shirts and other things. I don't, and devs and stuff. I don't think anything else has been taken out of that multi-sig, right, guys? Right, CB?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would help too. Like, so when we initially were thinking about the concept of the DAO and how everything works, I had I kind of look at it like, okay, we have the DAO, right, which is DAOpunks, and we have the that treasury that we just talked about, the multi-sig that has like the grant money in there and it has like the T-shirt money and stuff, right? And so that would be basically governed by the DAO. And then I was thinking, okay, well, obviously the DAO is going to need services provided for it. And that could be like art creation services, that could be merch creation services and logistics and all that
Mm.
stuff. And so I was thinking maybe the best route, or we were all thinking maybe the best route for that would be to basically have kind of like a sub company or a sub DAO, whatever you want to call it. That's kind of an arm's reach away from the DAO punks, and it basically just provides services for DAO punks. Um, and so that that way we basically have a spot to reimburse ourselves for certain expenses, to pay for certain things. Again, not get kind of locked up in bureaucratic kind of lockdowns to where we can't move and do certain things. And so that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, and so I mean, so we're docs on that stuff, right? So you can go look at Dow Punk Syndicate, public record, right? Um, and there's an LLC for that other operating arm, as well. Although none of these have been used yet. They don't have bank accounts. They're just sort of corporate structures that are hollow at the moment, that need lawyers to go to work on them, especially the nonprofit side, to get that set up. And so that's kind of where we're at. We're trying to figure out if we actually have money, in the multi-sig to pay an attorney to do that work. Because honestly, like, although I could do it, I'm trying really, I don't want to do it because it doesn't make my heart happy anymore. But if there's no dough for it, I mean, I'm gonna have to dive in and figure that out too. So that's a function of ETH price and expenses. And the last thing you want to do is sort of use that money, to dial in a nonprofit status, but then you don't have enough money to print T-shirts, right? Which is not the right move. I mean, the deal is, right, with these DAOs, we pretend it's otherwise, but I mean, under U.S. law, all contributors of a DAO are jointly and severally liable for the liabilities of the DAO, right? And so, like, the IRS could come knocking on Garrett's door and saying, "Hey, you know, you owe me $17,000 for DAO Punk's taxes." And if you have the corporate shield on top of that, that's not possible, right? Because the entity is
Oh
clearly liable.
man.
I know, Garrett. I'm sorry. You guys did a better job. So, I mean, you kind of, in doing this, I mean, you're kind of on the bleeding edge of what DAOs do. Most DAOs don't care about it. Most DAOs don't think about it. And, at some point, that's going to become a huge issue because all this information is available and on chain, right? And so, I think that practically speaking, they'll probably come after the multi, signers first. But there's no reason that that's for sure true. And like DAO punks is really low on the radar when it comes to DAOs. Of course, you're going to go attack like high profile, high dollar protocol DAOs first. But at some point the tax man cometh, right? And the statute of limitations on tax liability is like really long. I think it's 10 years. So just things to know
10
about.
lifetimes, probably.
All that stuff. It's like 150 DAO lifetimes. So there's all these kind of lovely things to think about too, right? Which I mean, your average person in DAO is not really thinking about this stuff too much.
Can I ask a follow-up question to your lawyer's predicament?
Sure.
Um, would Delpunks be considered rather? Sorry, I just joined in, but I heard this. And would you be more considering somebody in that actually is a member to be who is also a lawyer who is interested in this, or would you just rather consult with an outside law firm?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was an attorney for a long time. I'm just, I just don't practice anymore. And so, no, I would want someone. I don't really care if they're a lawyer who's also a DAO punk. I just don't want to do the work myself. Is all I'm saying. And honestly, like my skill set is not such that, uh, I'm going to be best to figure out, the intricacies of 501c3s and then how to make sure that DAO punks as a grant giving organization fits within the tax exempt kind of buckets that exist within that statute. And so, I mean, you can do the work if you wanted to put in a lot of time, but I think it makes a lot more sense to pay people who do that for a living to do that kind of work.
Yeah, yeah. I was just sorry. I just wanted to. It was just a curious question I had, but thank you.
Yeah, no, all good.
Okay, cool. I think a lot of what we just went through can be some food for the Treasury framework documentation, but I took a few notes on just like the core team as an aspect of our governance framework. I mean, and it's like this is still like our interim governance framework, so that includes a core team who has like some executive power, and we are we are giving some trust to some like benevolent dictators, in this organization with like the confidence of the value that you've generated so far, in value that you continue to generate moving forward, and our trust in your integrity. And yeah, like I think we've touched on a lot of good things that I can digest into the governance framework, and we're coming up onto the top of the hour. I have a bit more time to stick around. I don't know about everyone else, but is there any closing thoughts that anybody wants to touch on?
No, I think yeah, it was a good conversation. And yeah, I think that's a problem that a lot of DAOs are having right now. I think as long as there's humans involved and stuff, and there is no like automation, there has to be, in my personal opinion, there has to be people kind of held accountable for the success or failure of something, or else human nature, it just seems to kind of just wait along, and it takes a long time. And so um, everything that we've done up to now has been in what we see as good faith and trying to push the ball even further. And so I can totally see how like people can look at like the thought of a core team and say, oh, that's that could be potentially bad. I agree, it could, but I think it's also equally just as bad to not have a core team. It's probably even worse in my opinion, because then it's like, well, who's accountable at all?
Well, so some conversations we've had, CB, before you, where you were kind of getting married, which as a married man, I know that's a big event, was about automatic treasury triggers and safe snap and some things like that, right? Because over in like in Bankless DAO right now, there's the huge governance issue is essentially because treasury funds were dispersed, in violation of its own governance procedures, right? But if you had, those procedures laid out on code, we would have caught that problem way before it became the issue that it is right now. So I think automatic treasury triggers make sense at some point. I've come around to kind of Micos thinking on that stuff, but that's sort of a different question from whether you have, core teams or not. I think that's more like what's your multi-sig look like, and how does that integrate with DAO-wide voting.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and the question of, is the technology ready? It's like,
Right.
that's the other question as well, because I think everybody loves the concept of autonomous, but it's like, are we really even in a situation with the human race to be autonomous?
Totally it.
And it's like you're giving birth to a baby, and it's like that baby needs some time to grow, where it's going to be dependent on you and your attention and care before it can kind of grow up and go out into the world on its own. And that, I guess, the beauty of DAOs is that once they're ready, they can proliferate on their own, and they don't need you anymore to grow and expand. But it takes like a lot of nurture and care before it's ready to set sail like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the end goal. I really would love to have the opportunity one day to walk away from DAO Punks and say, okay, like it's flying on its own. Like, I am not involved other than maybe just a contributor. And if I decide to contribute or not, then it's still gonna keep flying. That would be wonderful, but I definitely don't think we're there yet. So
That perspective, I think, is really what makes the difference. That's really what like gives the core developers like integrity, is that like that's your goal. So that's cool.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want my name attached to anything that is not going to be a success. So so it is a little selfish, but it's I want it to be a success, and I only want to participate in things that are going to do good and do good in the world. So we'll see.
Nice. Well,
Fabulous.
so here we are at the end of the hour. I don't know if anyone has time to stick around, but this topic of actually picking a number for the grants work that we need to get done, and allocating some funds to a grants working group. Do we want to talk about that and try to nail that down? I mean, I feel like the sooner that we can nail that down, the better it's going to be for everybody. But I also understand if people don't have time for that.
Yeah, I mean, I can go to the potty, as my child say, and then come back and chat for a minute. But while we're all here, before like, it seems to me that, I mean, you had the 2.25 ETH to use, and then cut have three people building this thing out and cut that by a third. Is it really any more complex than that? Are you worried about paying the working group too?
I like the concept of
No,
using the 2.25 and then not paying the first working group. That's just
I
my
agree.
opinion.
Totally. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then honestly, like if the coordinate, if the leaders, like if you guys want to tip out, some bank or something after that, well, then go do that, right? Um, but I would tend to
I
agree.
think what Michael, what I don't think the complexity is with the math. It's just about clearly defining the roles and responsibilities of what's expected. And yeah, I'm happy to stick around, Michael. So I wanted to dig into that more yesterday, but ran out of time. So I'll be here.
But are we all good? But the 2.25 ETH, I mean, as Maiko and Garrett, you guys have expressed interest in, helping to lead that charge. And if you have a third of that, and because Stubbs, I recall, also expressed interest in that, and the three of you guys leading that charge strikes me as, I mean,
Gracias.
that strikes me as okay, right? Is that an okay number for you to do that kind of work?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
seems like a good
yeah,
model for me. I think I yeah, like how do we set this in stone? Do we want to just run a sesh poll on it, or should we run a snapshot, or should we just leave this up to the core team, to decide to just, hey, we're gonna do this? How do we do that?
I have learned a few hard lessons. Spending 20 hours a day in DAOs, and that's like sometimes you like centralizing shit for a period of time is not a bad idea. So I would just say like rubber stamp it now, get her done, and say that if you and Stubbs and Garrett want to lead this thing, great. And split 2.25 ETH and go do the work. I think the other thought would be that you do like, and this is pretty corporate sounding, but you could do like, you could have 1.75 ETH to split between the three of you, and then if you get it done faster, you get like another zero point 0.5 ETH juice bonus. I don't really like that, to be honest, although I know it's a common model. Um, I would say give yourself till the end, give yourself a few weeks to get it done, and then maybe you get paid half now and half on completion.
I
I
do.
wanted to. Oh, go. Sorry.
No, no, you go B17.
Yeah, yeah. So one thing I do want to point out that I agree with the hero is that in the beginning of something like new like this, right? It's okay to I think it is okay to centralize for just like that, but the idea of like eventually over time, like getting off that model, right? Like just to get things off the ground, I think is totally fine. I think just the commitment to the values is the biggest thing. We just need to get certain things off the ground. So I would agree with hero on that one.
I mean, to be honest, like, and thanks. I mean, but to be honest, we could throw up a session pool. It would be ratified, and then we could. I mean, if we want, some soft consensus by the community, fine, right? But it's just another. If you want to do that step, we would do it. It would be ratified, and we could move on if that makes everybody feel better. Um, I don't know. I'm not too concerned about it at this point, to be honest.
Yeah, I personally think making the executive decision on the amount paid is probably worth it, so we don't slow ourselves down any further. But
Right.
I do still believe we probably should have some sort of like election for this role. That way we could at least say, hey, everybody, here's what we're doing. If you're interested, throw your hat in the ring, and we probably should do an election. That way it just feels right.
Garrett and Micah.
That's how I imagined it. That makes sense to me. That's why I wanted to spend this time with Michael after this, just to clearly lay out what's expected, the compensation, and then say, okay, if you want to throw your hat in the ring, let's do this. We're voting on it, etc. So that was my next step plan for this afternoon.
What do you think, Micah?
Yeah, I'm easy. I'm open to going along with however this plays out. I'm sensing, yeah, I'm just, like, my brain is having like lots of interesting thoughts about intelligence systems, and like the benefit to risk of like of the different models that people have thrown out there. but without going into too much philosophy about it, I just say that I'm open to whatever the group decides to do, and like it's nice to know what I. It's like I'm already committing some hours to this. So if we're gonna hold some elections, like let's do it early on, so that if I'm not on the, if I'm not on the team, then I can let someone else do the work, or something like. However we're gonna do it, I would just say like let's get it done, so we can get started and feel like we know what we're getting out of the deal, and we can put in the work and feel good about it.
Yeah, I agree. So then, with that said, if we are going to run the election, what do we think that looks like? And I mean, how simple can we make it to not slow us down?
I gotta step out, but I can. If you're still here in like 10 minutes, I'll be back. Talk to y'all later.
Okay. So yeah,
Yep. Yep.
I mean, do you guys have any kind of preference? I mean, to be 100% honest, I think Garrett, Parrott, Maiko, I think Stubbs, I think you guys would probably get elected in anyways because you guys have been really like contributing a ton, and I think other people recognize that. So um, I just think it would be right to probably have it recorded some way in the community.
Yeah,
Yeah, Stubbs
maybe if
poll.
we drop it in actually inside the grants channel instead of doing like a server-wide sesh poll where like people who haven't been involved in the process, like I don't know, maybe we can reach out to anybody who has been authors of like the grants proposals so far, in case they just happen to not be here this meeting, they get a chance to show up for this and be like, hey, I already put in some work on this, I feel like I deserve a chance. um,
We'll throw out a grants tag, or tag the grants, right?
Well, that's it, and that's sort of like what I've seen in some elections. Otherwise, throughout our fine land, is they don't necessarily always work out the way you think they're gonna. And like to go back to like I'm cool decentralizing for a bit. I actually don't. I mean, I don't necessarily care about holding an election in this case. I think that I am totally comfortable making an executive decision, appointing those three people and paying them and getting the work done and moving on. I mean, I know for a fact like B Pete doesn't have the bandwidth to do that, right? He would probably be the only other one who has put in a bunch of work to this thing. I mean, see, Theophile did some work really early on, but he's been a non-entity here for
BP
like
came to
4 months,
mind,
right?
yeah.
5 months. And so I don't know. I think that if you go through the election process, you might be surprised by what happens. Hopefully not. But I don't like that variable too much, right? I mean, and part of that goes back to trust. I trust Garrett and Maiko and Stubbs to do the work, um, versus somebody else, right, who motivates support in the back channels of Discord to get voted into a job that they are not qualified for. And so, just my two bank on that one.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna retract what I was saying too. Actually, the more we're talking about it, I do feel like maybe we need to just make this executive decision and just keep this thing moving.
I
Because,
think
like
so
you
too.
said, it is a situation where there is not a lot of engagement, so it's really not hard right now to pick out who is the most engaged. It's really not tough.
I can tell you that who's been to basically every meeting Dow Punks has ever had for anything. that Garrett and Maiko are, the most involved people in this community. Stubbs, I would have put up there, but he had to drop off for work reasons, at some point, and I know he's coming back. But like, dude, you guys have been here like steadfast along with me in the trenches of this place, like for the last 2 months, right? For virtually everything from grants and governance meetings to mental health checks to whatever else we do in this fine place. And I mean, I trust you guys completely to do this work, where I would not trust somebody else. And like, this is, I mean, again, I think it's okay to centralize a bit before you decentralize, and there's blowback for that, and I'm happy to take the blowback too. You know.
Well, in that case, will you or Bushi make an announcement then, or make the statement so it's not coming from Maiko or myself?
Well, yeah, you would
Yeah,
just do an announcement through the announcement channel for sure.
yeah, we can do something. I guess Sinjin, do you have any thoughts on this? I know Sinjin's been sick, so maybe he's laying in bed.
I am laying down. Thank you. No, I'm just tuning in, and I do agree. Maybe sometimes it's good to just centralize things or make a quick decision to get things moving, and as long as we know, like that North Star at the end is this thing is running automated, fully decentralized, autonomously. We'll get there, but I don't think we have to make it everything right out of the gate.
Well, I mean, I thought we did for a while, Sinjin, and I've been wrong about that. I mean, I really believe that. I mean, I wanted to run working groups and decentralize everything, and then it was really clear, like when you came in yesterday, CB, and said, "Well, yeah, hold on now, man. Can we get some people some money?" Uh, that was the right thing to do, right? Um, and so, yeah, I mean, the North Star, I mean, in my mind, I mean, that's a really clear, bright star. And I don't think any of us are going to look past that by just kind of kicking off the grants work with a bit of centralization, going forward. And so, I mean, my thoughts, but I mean, I'm also mindful of what you're saying, Sinjin. And like in, my secret heart, yeah, I kind of want to run an election. Yeah, I kind of want to put it on Snapshot. I kind of want to make it official. I kind of want to have candidate statements. Um, but like one, we don't have a governance framework that provides for that. And so, you're sort of like just making it up anyway for the sake of making it up. And, maybe that's not necessary, I mean, if we were doing this in, contravention of a ratified governance framework, that would be problematic. But, we're not. I mean, we have an interim governance framework that doesn't talk about working groups, that essentially talks about one-to-one voting on Snapshot, and that's about it. You know.
Yeah. Well, what about? I mean, there's one other person we haven't heard from. Live Fast. Any thoughts on this?
Uh, uh, so I don't know how much my thoughts or opinions can matter to would appeal to you guys, because the only equivalent experience I have is that I am actually both the president of my HOA board and like of a local club that I handle. And as president of the HOA of my HOA, I get shit on every day for making executive decisions that I think are just like nobody gives a shit about like doing certain things, and it's just like it's easier to make a quick decision than to have everybody vote on something. So I completely agree. I completely acknowledge they're just like just do it, like just assign people, get it done, and whatever happens, just fuck it. Just like take the blowback, because it's so much easier. But there's also the realization that like yeah, making a decision that like is like the fastest and easiest one is like it's the best course of action, because otherwise you get stalled through time, energy, and just people opinions on it that just basically they weren't there in the decision making process or didn't care originally. So I kind of like the idea of what you guys have laid out so far. Just make a decision, and then if there is any blowback, which is subjective, that's fine. Does that help?
Yeah. No, I think it does help. I think
Sure.
we do appreciate your opinion. I really think we should just make the executive decision here, and let's just select Garrett Parrott, Maiko, and Stubbs to be the first champions of this cohort 0. And then really the next step is just figuring out clear deliverables and expectations, and then making some sort of announcement to the community and kind of formalizing it that way, and then kind of getting started and having some fun. Because really, in the end of the day, like we're trying to get all this done so we can actually start the fun part.
That's right, and it's not just like like running cohort 0. It's building the entire framework for the grants program, right? That's
Yeah.
a lot of work. You got to figure out how to build all the intake mechanisms, the sorting mechanisms, and the evaluation mechanisms, and that's a lot. And I think that it would make sense to have a working group behind you guys if you wanted one, but yeah, I also think you need to make the announcement right away. Until you actually have something to show for it, right? So I would say
Well,
just
how
stick to it.
how do we think? Do we think? I mean, do we think that really they should be coming up with what they believe the deliverables should be? I mean, since it kind of goes hand in hand with kind of like as they start to think like, okay, here's all the things we have to like address. I mean, does that make sense? And then you guys kind of come back to the community with your idea of the deliverables.
Well, that's what I was saying that I wanted to work on right now. Now that I'm home, just put a draft of what I think needs to be done, and let you guys or anyone else say, hey, I think this is what should be done by the role. But that was my next step, to just lay out the deliverables, basically, lay out a draft.
What about you,
Okay.
Mike?
Yeah, that sounds good. And then I guess we have to just talk to Stubbs and make sure he even wants this election. I believe he does. depending on that was my impression yesterday on the call. But I guess we should just make sure, and then yeah, I think we're good to roll. And I guess you guys can just get started, and you already know what the amount that's going to be paid already, so we'll have to just figure out how to kind of formalize everything.
Micah, as being a leading voice of decentralization these last few months, what say you?
Yeah, this is great. I had a really great chuckle at what Live Fast had to say, because I've had some of those experiences, and it's painful, but so true. And honestly, like, my philosophy on this stuff is like that the fundamental optimization for an authority structure is the intelligence of the system. So like, democracy truly does represent a deeper and more dynamic intelligence within a broad and complex system. But in a smaller and simpler system, centralized authority can sometimes represent a higher degree of intelligence. So for me, like, there's the idealism layer, but the idealism is tied into functionality, and the functionality is based on what system like has the greater degree of intelligence. And then in this situation, it's like, if we're talking about putting it to an election and a vote, it's like, well, are we saying that there's a greater level of intelligence like out there in the broad community of DAO Punk NFT holders at this stage? Not necessarily. Like, everyone out there doesn't really have like a grasp on the details of what's going on right here, right now. The people who are showing up at these meetings right here, right now, are the people who have a grasp on what's actually going on. So to me, like, that's what represents like the greatest system of intelligence, is like a centralized decision at this stage. So I agree with you guys on that.
It's
And
very well said.
That was slippery. I liked it. Okay, so why don't Aaron, Micah, you guys do your thing. I'm gonna go feed my family some lunch and move on to getting the weekly roll up out at Bankless. And I think this is an interesting meeting. It makes me feel a little uncomfortable, but I think it's the right move, and I'm glad it makes me feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's for the greater
Yeah,
good.
well
So
said, guys.
cool.
Well, then I guess.
Yeah, when can we expect that to come through?
So I guess we have. Are you talking about the payment for ETH?
Yeah.
What exactly are you talking about?
Oh yeah, totally. The payment.
So I guess we have to figure out that next. I mean, do you guys want to come up with the deliverables, and then we'll talk between the core team and figure out like a payment structure? I guess I'm thinking probably it makes sense to have like maybe an upfront payment and then maybe like a back end payment.
Yeah, totally.
And then we'll just message amongst ourselves on the core team and just make sure we're all on the same page, and then we'll come back to you guys, and then you guys maybe will have some other framework set up like deliverables and stuff, and then that way we can all kind of just link up again.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, can I bullet point some deliverables right now real quick, just to have that on there?
I have to go feed my family too real
Okay.
fast, so I gotta go.
All right, cool.
But and then I don't know, do you and Garrett want to set up like a chat, like a private chat with Stubbs too, and just kind of just fill him in on what's been going on this call?
That's what I was gonna say too. Why don't you got the three of you should get in a DM. I mean, if you want to loop in me and CB and Sinjin, like, that's fine, but don't feel compelled to. And go from there. I mean, I'm happy to watch as a fly. Actually, you know what? I don't really need to be a part of that at all. So, yeah, why don't you guys figure it out? CB, are you gonna ping Stubbs to see if he wants to make sure he wants to do that?
Yeah, I'll ping Stubbs, and then we'll circle back on this payment, and we'll make sure that we get you guys paid, and so you guys get started, and we'll go from there.
Nice. Cool, man. Buen provecho. Enjoy the family time.
All right, guys.
Very cool. Thanks,
This
guys.
was a productive meeting. Thank you, everybody. Sinjin, I hope you feel better, pal.
Thank you, man. Rest out. Thank y'all.
You're welcome.